I'm here today to interview Boris Martinov. Boris is a mycologist, he's a health enthusiast, and he's also a modern day witch. So today he's going to talk a little bit about the history of Western mysticism and how that bridges to modern science today. Hi, Boris. Welcome. How are you doing today?
Hi, Stephanie. You're doing great.
How is it being in New York City during the coronavirus pandemic?
Oh, it's heavy. It's tense out here. You can feel it in the air, so to speak.
Yeah, in a literal sense, really. So, Boris, I've known you for a really long time. We've had a lot of fascinating discussions over the years. And, recently you wrote this article for Yoga Forager. And in the bio, you mentioned you're a student of Western mysticism. And I was just curious what that actually was.
I don't know if it's an official thing. I kind of use it as an umbrella term for the Western magical tradition and spirituality, and I like to call it all of the things that you would be born for as a witch, uh, 400 years ago.
Interesting. So it's really a wide breadth of different studies that kind of encapsulate the spiritual traditions. So how does astrology fit into Western mysticism? Would that?
I I, I think of astrology in terms of Western spirituality as it's kind of the glue, the thread that holds everything together. Um, it, if we begin with prehistoric times when people lived, um, like in caves in tribal societies, and the way they imagine the world is that they had like our physical reality where we live, and then they had the underworld where you go when you die, and then they had the heavens above, and the heavens above was where the gods lived, right? And the gods had their intrigues and whatever, and their actions affected things down on our physical plane, in our world. And so when the Asians looked up in the sky at night, they saw all of these stars, and they imagined the stars as deities, as gods. And they saw some of the stars were moving, so they imagined myths and ways to you know talk about that, about these things. But the the astronomy and the astrology has always fascinated people, and not only the Western tradition, but I think it's important in the Western tradition because following like the evolution of astrology, you can kind of get a sense of different spiritual traditions at different times, and how and different cultures that affected the West. And so in later times, you have um, Egyptian and Greek. Uh, you see astrology going into Egyptian and Greek cultures, and solidifying that sense of the gods ruling over our world. And then later in the medieval period, you have a lot of interest in um, astrology in terms of predicting worldly events. Like you will have Europe was divided into many small kingdoms, and the kings would like often uh, be at war with each other, and they're very interested in predicting the correct times to do things. Like they believe if you like got married on a specific date when the planets were aligned correctly, then it will be like a very beneficial marriage. Or like when to start a war, or like how to basically how the planets and celestial events affect their world. And so they would have court astrologers who would do horoscopes for them. And it was like one of the highest paying jobs. Like if you went and studied, if you were like a PhD mathematics, like if you went to college and studied mathematics at a PhD level, that what that would get you is you would be an astrologer. Like that would be like the best job that you can get in the medieval period, because you would go and do horoscopes for the king.
That's
And
really interesting because nowadays astrology is oftentimes looked at as something that's for hobbies. It's a little kooky. People are far out. It's interesting that at one point society was very much determined by astrological interpretation. So, how did the medieval time, how did the European Renaissance, that period between about 14th and 16th century, how did that change spirituality?
so in the 15th century, you have the Turkish Empire. They invaded Europe and they besieged Constantinople. And when the people of Constantinople saw that the city is gonna fall, they pretty much emptied all the books from the libraries, and they literally threw them over the wall, onto ships, and those ships traveled to Italy, to Rome and Venice and Florence, and these cities of the Renaissance. And over there, they started translating these old Greek books on philosophy and science and spirituality, and that really shifted their whole view. Like it really opened up a whole new way of looking at the world. And it wasn't only science, it wasn't only the way they looked at the world through a scientific perspective. It was also very spiritual. They had a lot of books on ancient spirituality. But what's interesting is that in the antiquities, in ancient Greece and Egypt, science and religion were always together. Like there was no separation. The astrologers were astronomers. Like there were the scientists. There were the smartest people doing research. And but then when that became translated in the medieval times, that came contrary to the worldview of the church. And so there was this conflict between the church saying, no, these are heresies, this is not how the world is. And then on the other hand, you had these new scientific views that they were fighting against the views of the church. And so what happened was the church would start prosecuting these scientists like Galileo, Copernicus, and what came out of that is the separation between spirituality and science, because science had to prove in court that it wasn't magic, like it wasn't something given to humanity by the devil. They had to like go to court and they had to show, like, see, like, this is how this works, and you can do it too. Like this is a telescope, and like you can look through the telescope and you can see the planets, and they're there, and they're real. Like that's not the work of the devil. Like this stuff is real, and this is how science became very objective. The way we know it today is because it had to prove everything in court, and I think that's where the separation came, because in the antiquity there was no big separation between science and spirituality.
That's really fascinating. You know, and you're also a student of both Western mysticism and also modern science. So it's interesting in your own personal interest, you kind of bridge that gap again where for many hundreds of years it's been separated. So you recently wrote an article for Yoga Forager about coronavirus. It's an article more about the disease itself. You know, I've known you as someone who's a mycologist. You like to study fungi and mushrooms. What's your interest in viruses?
I didn't have a big interest until the pandemic came, and then it really just started for me as you know, I was looking for a way to protect myself. Like, what can I do? Like, how does this thing work, right? But then there's so much disinformation. There's so much fake articles that it became a little bit of a game, like going around and trying to verify information, trying to see like what is fact and what is um, a lot of like fake things, like for no reason, just trying to sift information. And I really focused on scientific studies. Like I would look at studies and read them carefully and see what they were looking for and what the results were. Um, their medical and scientific YouTube channels or lectures. You can find lectures. All the I found the online lectures from Columbia University on virology. You can learn everything that Columbia University teaches about virology on YouTube, and you can understand how viruses work by just watching. I think it's 21-hour videos or something like that. So yeah, it became a fascination. Uh, also, I like learning. Like I like the more you learn, the more you realize there's even more out there. So it becomes a little bit of a game to, you know, you become interested in one subject and then you explore it and then you find something else interesting and go towards that. But then you don't understand something, so you look for ways to understand and explain to yourself how these things work, and this is how it all started. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Boris, for really doing that rigorous effort of looking into the medical science and the research. And your article is really wonderful. So, folks, if you're interested in reading Coronavirus, What We Know About the Disease, visit yogaforager.com. Boris, thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you stay well and we can reconnect soon.
Thank you, Stephanie. That was great.
Thank you.